Hi guys, welcome. I'm so excited today to be talking to Jason Brown from Katoa Project. Jason is a longtime friend of mine, an old client, and we've been working together on lots of things from Katoa Project to side projects. We're constantly communicating about new things that we can do together. So I'm really excited for you guys to hear from him, get to pick his brain. Today, we're specifically going to be talking about navigating donors and fundraising. So really fun, exciting things, right? We love fundraising.
Absolutely. It's got a lot of fun in it, and we do try to raise as much as we can at any given moment. So
And have a good time doing it too.
absolutely.
Yeah, Jason, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Oh, I like your introduction, but I'll go ahead and do it. My name's Jason Brown. Got a lovely wife and daughter that's 2 years old, and I've been working with Katoa Project since 2015. So I've got 10 years in the nonprofit experience with international nonprofits, and then I also had some more experience, in the school setting and some nonprofits related to sports. So looking forward to chatting about and picking my brain a little bit.
Yeah. For those who don't know Katoa Project, can you share a little bit about what Katoa Project does?
Absolutely. So Katoa Project has evolved over the years, but what we do is we kind of compartmentalize into three main areas, which is counseling, training, and then community programming for young adults and youth and caregivers in the community. So we provide one-on-one and group counseling, we provide trauma-informed care trainings, and then we walk alongside the youth and the adults and the caregivers that go through our programs in the community, side by side, in the good days and the bad.
Yeah. There's a lot of different pieces to it. I've personally gotten to witness all of it traveling to Nairobi, Kenya to visit. And it's really powerful to see the amount of work that you do and the impact of work that you do as well.
Oh, well, it's not just one person. I think what the cool part is the team that we have on the ground of 11 individuals that have gone through a rigorous amount of training, have, a lot of thoughtful input, a lot of careful conversations, and really put together a organization that is, faith-filled and pushing forward a great initiative with mental health and training. So
Yeah. So you've worked in multiple nonprofits over the years. Have you specifically done donor engagement, donor management for all of those nonprofits, or is that something that you kind of dove into with Kutoa?
I call it baptism by fire. So for Katoa is where I've spent a majority of my time fundraising. With the other roles within nonprofits, I was more of on the board of directors, or I was more of a liaison between the community aspect and the board of directors. So to more advance their agendas. But with Katoa Project specifically, that's where I've had most of the time to kind of, I don't want to say hone the craft, but understand what it takes to kind of move an initiative forward, or a mission and vision, and walk alongside organizations and donors that take an interest in doing that.
Yeah, I think baptism by fire is such an interesting way to put it, because you're getting thrown into it. And to your point, there's always going to be things that you refine as you go. Like the way that you started fundraising 10 years ago is not the way that you do it now. And I'm excited to hear that journey of things that you really appreciated then, but now you're like, I wonder why I did it that way.
Oh man. I think one of the first things I would say is, when I first started doing it, it's very cringeworthy. It's a weird context to go back and look at what you used to do, feeling like it was the best thing ever, of like, hey, here's this child that needs a service, I'm going to tell this story. And you're kind of like, man, I didn't do that in a very empathetic way, or I did it in a very financially minded way instead of telling a story. And I think that's been one of the major things over the course of the last 10 years, is learning how to tell a story, learning how to walk somebody along and be part of a story, versus just sharing, please listen to this story. So
yeah. Well, I think that's really interesting. I want to kind of dive into that, because I think you've said you've had different stages of a way that you were telling a story before versus the way you're telling a story now. Can you walk through, maybe let's start with the first one, because I think there's going to be people listening who might be at that first stage and don't know what they don't know, right?
Absolutely. So for me, I think back to social media, and my wife handed me the reins and said, hey, you can kind of start telling the story and doing it. It's like, where do you start? It's like, what story is the most important? How do I get somebody to care about something as much as I care about it? And then learning that it's okay that not everybody cares.
Mm.
about that story in the same light. So it's trying to figure out what really strikes their chord. I think early on, um, it was a lot of trial and error, but it was a lot of disappointment, to be quite honest. Like when you first start trying to tell something that you're very passionate about and nobody gets it, you're like, ah, like, why don't you get it? Why don't you get it? Like, figure it out. And you want the other person to receive it. And really, it's the way you're telling the story. So you really have to do a lot of self reflection of like, all right, I'm not telling it the way somebody wants to receive it, and it's trying to figure out how to adjust it for different audiences. Like, I think one of the hard parts about early on is that we were so new that most people just associated what we did with my wife, and it was like telling her story, so to speak, of getting it started and moving it forward. And we didn't have a lot of these other, what I would say, paramount moments within like what we're doing and the milestones and all of these other great things that we can talk about. And it was trying to figure out how to navigate that, focus away from my wife's story into Katoa's story. And I think that was really a learning curve. But then learning how to tie in fundraising and asking people to be part of the story in a different way, like financially, corporately, prayerfully, all of those things of sharing all of these messages, and then on the back end, promoting an organization to use their services. So it's like you have 5 or 6 different stories. It's like, where do you focus?
Yeah, I think the money piece is such an interesting like add on because you can share stories and try to get people to emotionally attach to it. But then when you add a money ask, then it can feel very salesy very quickly.
Right. It's a very fine line. So I think one of the things that I would say like 5 years in, when it was finally starting to feel a little bit more comfortable, we have more of an established organization. We have more in-country opportunity to share stories that aren't just our stories. Um, it got, I don't want to say easier, but it became more fluent and allowed us to have conversations in a different context. And I think one of the things that like really stepped up this transformation is we really leaned into letting locals help tell the local story. So we found local videographers, we found local photographers, we found stories within our community there that resonated here. Like, looking at the feelings of like when we talk about mental health, the things we think about are anxiety, fear, loss, all of these things. This is something that like me and you can relate to, or
Mm-hmm.
any audience that we talk to can relate to those emotions. And it's figuring out how to tell that story in an eloquent way, an empowering way, and not just what I would say for shock value.
Right. And I think that's something that I've noticed with some nonprofits when they first start out is like trying to pull in that shock value. But
Mhm.
I think that creates a big divide of like the organizations over here, the people that you're serving are over here, and we're over here. And this is a little bit of the white saviorism, a little bit of like there's a disconnect there, and it creates that further divide where what you're talking about is we all have these human experiences. We're all sharing the same feelings. They manifest in different ways because we do live in different environments, but like sharing that common ground is what's going to make people really feel like they care and they can see themselves or see how understand it a little bit better.
Right. And I mean, it's kind of the word you use there, understand. And like understanding things just takes time. I think that's one of the
Mm-hmm.
biggest things I've learned about the whole journey is it's like what I wrote 10 years ago or 5 years ago or whatever, it's taken time to get to the point it's at now. So like one of the big goals I had for Katoa Project when we started talking about social media and websites and all of this stuff is what does it take to move us to be in like that top 3 to be searched? How can we get to the top of your bucket? And it took a lot of self-reflection, it took a lot of self-education, a lot of YouTube, a lot of reading, things like that, keywords, all the fun stuff that like you can nerd out onto all day long. But it's like a drum. You just had to figure out how to hit the right rhythm and to make it relevant, and what's the cadence need to be, and then realize that the cadence is going to change in 6 months anyways. So it's like, how do you stay ahead of all of these little curves? And it's still a challenge to this day. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a rut right now. Like you're coming into year-end fundraising, and it's how do you keep your story in the front of everybody when everybody else now is starting to tell the story of why they need you and their funds. So it's just, it's one of those things that's just kind of like an ever evolving cycle of madness. So
yeah. When it comes to the messaging that you share with people, how has that evolved in some of the wording that you use in your communications?
I think for me, I try to be more empathetic in my tone and storytelling along with being informative. So it's like, speak simply. It's a conversation online, just as it is anywhere else. And it's kind of got the format and the cadence of share a key theme, give a little bit of what the impact statement's going to be, and then how can we continue to have that conversation? Is it a comment? Is it a phone call? Is it an email? I think specifically right now for us, it's getting people in our office, getting people in our programs. So our messaging really focuses on how to do that easily. So it's, what are you facing? What are you experiencing? This is how we've helped. This is how you can connect. So it's very just a 3-step process of really driving them home, and not doing it in a way that's just boring or
Yeah.
not real life is how I look at it. Like telling the story of everyday living is kind of how we get most of our traffic. So it's been one of those things that's been unique to see over time.
What has been your experience with getting new donors? I think we a lot of times kind of focus on the recurring, like let's sustain those people. I want to talk about that too, but first, how do you get them in the door?
New donors, it's unique, right? Like it's a conversation, and I can approach it from a lot of different angles, but like for us to get a new donor, I would say it takes anywhere from 7 to 15 conversations or touch points across the whole cycle. I've had some that we've nurtured that relationship and it took 5 years in those conversations. And I've had some that it takes 30 days where we've sent a couple of emails, we followed up, Shay's had a meeting, and then boom, there it is. We've had some that just walk in the door and they go, we like what you do, we want to give. Like those are the ones that you really like because you're like, all right, you already know us, you're already established, you already feel comfortable investing in our team. And that's kind of how I look at it. It's like finding an investor in what you do, not necessarily a donor, but you're investing in somebody's dream. You're investing in a mission or a vision that you have a commonality with, or you have something about it that touches you in a way that you want to give to it. It continues to be a challenge because international fundraising is different. I think sometimes like there's a lot of different ways people portray how to give to organizations. And one of the things I do love about what we do is telling the story. And if you're wanting to be part of that story, then walk with it. If you're not, we'll still walk with you regardless. It's just not what you want to walk with at that moment in time. And that's okay. It doesn't mean they won't have a conversation about something they've heard. I think one of the cool parts is I was listening to a conversation the other day about, you never know how many ripples come from a rock throw. So it's like a conversation's a rock. I'm throwing it out there. You never know what ripples are going to have. And the same way goes for pulling the rock out of the water. It still creates a ripple too. So maybe you pull them out of a different direction. They want to come to your way of finding out what you do. But I think, specifically right now, it's a unique season because when you're in a season of growth, people want to be part of that story. It's when you're functioning day to day, normal, no major events happening or anything like that. That's when it becomes hard to have that conversation. And it's like, well, what big thing's coming up? Nothing. We're here. We're established. That's the big thing. Like a lot of people always look for the next thing or the next thing or the next thing. It's like, no, we're doing what we said we're going to do, and we're doing it daily, and we're empowering those that we've asked to do it. And that's the milestone.
And we're getting stronger every day because we're doing it every day. Like,
right. And
doesn't have to be building new things.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the unique things about fundraising is like you always feel, and I think especially nonprofits feel this. I think we've felt this some in our growth journey, is like we always have to add something else to make somebody want to be a part of it. And really that's when you start drifting away or losing fire. You start getting burned out because you're always like, I've got to reinvent the wheel. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. Where why not just obsess about what you do really well? So like for Katoa, we do counseling really well. We do training really well. We are getting into the community really well. We don't need to do a lot of other things. Let's just do these really well, and then learn how to tell that story and find those moments of like what really attracts somebody to be to it and what will bring them, joy of being part of that story, I guess.
Yeah.
So
You mentioned the 7 to 15 touch points. What are some examples of those touch points aside from your in-person conversations? I think that's kind of a given.
yeah, so I can actually just do like kind of a calendar year for you. It's kind of
That'd be
really
great.
easy. We have an event usually January to March. We started it 3 years ago coming up. We start with in person, give a year synopsis, kind of talk about it, encourage donors, encourage the community to come. It's free, all that fun stuff. Follow up with an email right after, follow up with another email right after, maybe get a conversation, let it sit for a little bit. Usually we have a trip in there somewhere. We send another email, or maybe we try to get a phone call, or we send a postcard. So, I mean, now we're up to 6. And then we're kind of coming into the year end when we start, and it sounds funny, year end in August and September, being a little bit more intentional. Like, hey, you walked with us in January or March. This is what we were doing. This is what we've been able to do. We'd like to continue that partnership together. And it's kind of just that same cycle. For our size nonprofit, which is like around that, $200,000 to $250,000 a year nonprofit. What I feel is big is not big in the grand scheme of marketing and all of that stuff. So we are, considered a very small nonprofit in the scheme of things. Our fundraising cycle starts earlier. I hate Giving Tuesday. You can quote me on it. You can use the soundbite. I think it's one of the worst days of that's ever been created. It creates this misnomer that like all of the goodwill happens on one day. There's 364 other days, and I care about our donors the other 364 days. Doesn't mean I don't mind receiving the money on Giving Tuesday. It just means I'm not going to focus on one day when I've got a whole calendar year of focusing on what we do and who does it with us. Like that's more important to me. And when I started shifting that mindset, probably 3 years ago, our fundraising efforts really kind of took off differently. Shay and I had conversations. We moved things more program and project oriented and did it at different times of the year, which one made it exciting because while it wasn't something new, it was a new time of the year to do it. And it gave us an opportunity to tell a story and share a touch point and share a milestone or whatever it would have been, and then move things forward and not just relying on, hey, I'm going to spend August to, November 28th, developing social media and all of these quirky little things to draw attention to it that, I'll be honest, maybe 5 or 6 people will read, click they like, put a comment or whatever, because it just doesn't work that way. So it's evolved in a lot of different opportunities for us to tell the story throughout the year. So I guess,
I think to that point, it's like it's an ongoing relationship building. Like it's not just a one time and done. And even when you get somebody in for the first time, it's not over, right? Like, so what happens after that? We've talked about the initial getting them in, but once somebody is a donor, do you still go through kind of the same routine every year? Or do you have a little bit different because they have been an existing donor?
This is where I'm learning, to be quite honest. It's so we've spent most of our time on the field for the last decade where we haven't had a chance to really dive into our donors. I know that sounds bad. I know that's like, oh, so you don't care. No, we've been doing what they've trusted us to do, which is go and build an organization. So now we're learning how to be present and telling the story, which for us is very hard. Because, we feel like we're missing out. We have FOMO of being, with the team. We also have missing out with the people that have been supporting us. Their lives have moved on for 10 years. While we know major milestones for them, we haven't walked with them either. So it's a lot of getting to know them again. It's a lot of conversations of like, what have you liked that we've done? And making note of that. And it's being very intentional about that record keeping. I don't want to do a shameless plug here, but like our software that we use to do all of our donor management is now kind of our lifeline. It lets us know.
No, please plug it. I think that it's helpful for
we
people
use
to.
a software called Bloomerang. It's a subscription-based service. It's very affordable. in the context of the business, it's very affordable. That helps us keep track. Like, we go on a walk with somebody, I can put that in there. What did we talk about? Was there something that stood out in the walk? Did they tell me about something that's been going on for them? It allows me to come back and create a moment. It's like, hey, I want to send them a quick card. Like, thanks for the walk, or this, that, or, just little things that aren't necessarily organizationally related, but human related. So it's like, and I call it the human capital. Like, there's a whole different kind of capital that goes into raising an organization, and that's the human aspect. It's not the money. The money moves it forward, and it's going to come and go as it pleases, and you're still going to do what you do, whether you have a lot of it or a little of it. You're going to figure it out. But if you keep the people, then it's okay. Like, I can count on one hand how many donors we've lost in 10 years, and I'm not tooting our horn, but I think it's because we're involved. Even when we're 10,000 miles away, we're getting postcards together. We're handwriting postcards to all of our donors. Our team is signing them. We're doing all of those things to make it very personal and a key touch point, even if it's a small thank you. It's just small little details that help move it just so much further. To be honest, the software, when we moved to it, it allowed us to kind of see a broader picture of what the ministry looks like, or what the organization looks like. And by moving to it, we raised our funding 18%.
That's
In
incredible.
30 days, just by figuring out how to get rid of some fees and some things like that. And at the same time, we launched our first story, a little mini documentary of 6 minutes. And honestly, when you have something else telling your story besides you, that's powerful. That's kind of when we started to see, all right, this is worth it. This is how we justify spending some of that money to do those things. Because I think for the longest time, we kind of felt paralyzed. It's like, we raised this money, but if I use it to tell the story, am I stewarding it the right way? But you are. It's marketing. It's advertising and marketing. And once you start understanding that, like, nonprofits are businesses, faith-filled nonprofits are businesses as well. And so carving out a budget to tell the story makes sense. And I would say, since we started doing that in 2020, just right after, it's made a world of difference. Like, people talk about COVID being the worst, season of their life. For us, it was great. We had intentional time with our team. We had a chance to reorganize what we do. We were able to focus on telling the story digitally. We learned a lot when the world shut down, and in our field, that actually helped us out in mental health, because telehealth came out. We were one of the first people to get in on that. And then just having time to read and understand, like, all right, we've been doing it this way, let's shift it, see what happens here, and tell our story a different way. It worked. So each year, I would say we've seen 5 to 10% growth every year in what we do. And hopefully, coming in on 10 years, we want to see a little bit more growth. So we're going to try some things with our first capital campaign. See how that goes. Like, we've never done like a full, let's raise some big dollar money, is what I call it.
Yeah.
But it's
trying new things out.
Yeah. And you know what? I go into it thinking we're going to fail anyways. So it's like, why not? Like, we're just going to build it. We're going to have fun building it. We're going to put it out there. One of the things I like to do is create these things. And then let's see what happens. Like, it could totally suck and blow up in your face. Or it could be, we could hit a home run and you move it forward, maybe the next year, in 5 years, do it again. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think to your point too about like the whole tracking, using Bloomerang to track, using just anywhere to be able to track numbers and track how people are responding to things, because over time you start to see patterns of if it works or not. I think
Right.
A lot of times I've seen organizations be reactive and they're like, oh, I don't think that it worked, so I'm just gonna like stop doing it. But if you didn't give it another try or keep seeing how it happens over a given period of time, then you don't actually know what those numbers are, right?
Right. For me, I give it like 3 years. Anything I do, any side hustle, like all of that stuff, I'm like 3 years. First year is going to suck because you're learning how to do it. Second year, you kind of hope the needle goes a little higher. Third year, break even or get out. Like, that's how I look at it when I think about a business or anything like that, or if I think about an opportunity to do something. If I'm not breaking even or doing something higher in 3 years, move it away. It's no different in what we do, like in terms of programs for Katoa. There's some that we know we need to get rid of like very quickly. Like it's just, right person, wrong box, wrong person, just the wrong box. Let's get rid of it. Like you have a very definitive, set of goals that you want to see in a short time. If it's not hitting it, let's just cut it. That's not a good use of money, or human capital. Like our staff could be doing something else. But like longevity, we have this fundraiser we're going to do for the third year. We're going to try a couple of things different in March. We're pushing it back a couple of months for a couple of different reasons. We have a trip coming up, just some different things going on, personally, professionally. And then we're going to expand that out into a capital campaign that goes through June with the hopes of raising $100,000. And, my math, there's no secret. We've been in operation for 10 years. I was like, 10,000 a year sounds great. 100,000. That's how I got to it. Very simple math. So if somebody wants to see, what the geniuses look like out there, that's kind of what we do, right? We just go 10 years times 10. Let's go. And that will go into operational cost, expansions, things like that, things that we want to see happen over the next, 5-year plans to me are a joke. So it's like what we want to see happen over like the next 18 to 36 months. Like what can we do effectively with that? We don't want to hold it for 5 years. We want to go and see what we can do. But then that's where, that gives Shay freedom and our team freedom to be like, all right, we have breathing room instead of always being in this constant cycle of like, well, if I want to do a project, I've got to go out, raise $15,000, then I can do the project. But if it's $16,000, I can't do it. So you just you want to eliminate the stress.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. So like we're at a point now where with some of these tools, we've gotten rid of the stress. Like we know the lights will stay on, whereas early on, in like say the first 5 years, you're kind of like, all right, gonna stay with us, right? We got it. COVID hit. That was like the first thing we did. We started talking to our donors really deep of like, you're not leaving. We're still going. Like once they got an understanding of like, we didn't leave, we stayed. Our team is still going. We're still operating. Like that created a different level of investment and trust. And then, this next phase or this next 5-year cut, if you want to look at it from year 10 to 15, it's like now we're growing. Is it new offices? Is this? Is it that? And then how do we tell that story? How do we project growth and vision? And I think one of the things we're going to do, hopefully well, we can't predict it, but we kind of have an armature that we set up to tell our story. So for us, it's the road to restoration begins in a safe place. So for people that have followed along on the journey, we've started telling the story diligently. So we started with the story of counseling and how somebody got into it. We started with the story of a healing group. We started with the story of a training. And then now we're moving into kind of the story of community and how people stay involved in the whole circle. And then you tie that back into, why it started, how it's growing, where we want to see it go. And hopefully that comes together well. We love our designer in Kenya in terms of the videography and the photography. Telling it culturally, telling it empathetically, and most importantly, empowering.
Yeah.
These are very vulnerable stories, and we keep those stories not quiet, but we only share those with audiences that we want to hear that story. So, what I would encourage organizations that maybe have hard things to talk about is figuring out what do you want to share publicly, what do you want to share privately. And our events are opportunities to hear those stories. So that's where we create people that want to have that conversation. And then we just share little snippets here and there throughout on social media. Not a lot of videos. Like I said, not a lot of the white savior-ish stuff or, the poverty grabs is what I call it. We don't need shock value. That's humiliating at the end of the day. Like I read some of my stuff early on, and I'll be honest, I took examples from what I thought was a good way to write. And then over time, I educated myself, and I'm like, no, let's tell a story. Let's change some names. Let's, do it differently, so that way people can have a better understanding of what we do and what we can do together. So,
yeah, I wanted to talk. You've mentioned it earlier on in the conversation than you just did as well, of things that you've invested in to help tell your story more. So when you're in Kenya, you're talking about like videography and really using that to share your story. What are some other ways that you've invested in your marketing that have been really beneficial for your organization?
Well, I would say our email marketing, one of those aspects, we're actually reinvesting a little bit more time into it. So there's a group out there called Tarvent that we're going to navigate into, that some big box companies use. They offered an opportunity to purchase a license. I'll share one of the things I get on is called appsumo.com. I look for small firms that are looking for venture capitalists to buy lifetime memberships to move them along. And we've hit a couple of home runs for social media. I use a group called Social Bee that I bought 8 years ago. If I were to buy it today, it'd be a $2,000 to $3,000 a month service. I bought it for $50 as a lifetime, and I'm good. So it's like finding some little quick home runs and being willing to be very flexible. If you're small enough, you can do that. Tarvet's the same deal. It usually costs $2,000 a month, but they want another round of funding, so they offer it a $199 lifetime. So I was like, done, we're in, we're moving. So, it's creating, it does create small changes, but it also makes a big bottom dollar impact. So I would say, and then, Serif Design has been great as well. It's helped us. I mean, hey, it's helping us tell our story in two different ways. We are a nonprofit. We also are an organization that provides services. So where we were to where we are now is light years ahead of really being able to invite people to be part of the story. And I think one of the things I really enjoyed about when you walked alongside us was that you listened to our team and you listened to Shay and I, and you got all of our perspective about what it is that we want to see done at the core of our values. Not necessarily the core of our business, but our values that portray into what we do. And that helped really move the needle forward digitally as well. And then when you add all of these tools together, I mean, we're spending very small amounts of our budget on tools that cost thousands of dollars a year. So it's really being mindful of trying to find opportunities to navigate into things that may make you uncomfortable at first. Like I never thought I'd use a social media management software. I think when I started out, it was Hootsuite or whatever was going on. And it was like, hey, click on this for 30 free posts a month. And then now I can link into like 50 different things at one time. And I can create it one time or a couple of times and send it out and be done. I use a tracking software. They changed their name, so I can't really remember. It was called Visio, but it was another deal where I went through and I was like, I need to know who's reading this and where. Like, am I dialing this in right? And I know everybody's all big on Facebook and Meta and Instagram, but those are one-sided analytics at the end of the day. So what's really nice is if you have a third-party software, you can kind of clear the dust and see actually where your message is going. That's been fun stuff. Man, I'm looking at my library of stuff right now. There's a whole series that's like value propositions and business model redesigns, and it's these workbooks that are by Wiley Publishing that are amazing as well, that you basically sit down and it's not a dummies book. These are all great people that wrote it. So it's really kind of cool. It's a collective of business leaders, e-commerce managers, all of this stuff that you go through and you just find parts of what you do and you try to make them better. Right now, yeah, the list goes on. I think at any given time, I feel like I have more stuff to go through than I have time to implement. So
yeah, but I think it's cool to see how you've tried lots of different things and you eventually find your way to these platforms that work really well for you. Like the Tarvent seems like it's going to be a really good fit. There's a lot of other things that seem to be like over years you've found a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it is that trial by fire and trying to work through things. The app that you said is AppSumo.
Yep.
Is that right? AppSumo lets you find different platforms that are just kind of starting out. So you can
a lot of startups, a lot of like what I would consider like, very small. Some aren't small, but they're just trying to get rounds of funding to kind of bring them up to the next level so they can move their roadmap forward, but also bring people into what they do well. So It's been really good. There's a lot of different sites that do it. I love theirs. They're based out of Texas. They also do just a lot of different things that encourage small organizations to take big risks. So, and that's kind of what we've done. We do it all the time. And I, like I said, I've got a suite of things that I use. I've got Canva, Social Bee, Bloomerang, Tarvent. Let's see. I would even say, Google, nonprofit for Google, Business Manager, because that's free. If you go through and do the grant, you get that free plus $10,000 of free fund or free ad space or whatever.
That is something I would always recommend people is if you're looking at a platform, check to see if they have a nonprofit discount, because oftentimes they do. I know Canva does as well.
Yeah. I mean, I operate on a lot of these things for free. It's so nice because if I ended up figuring it up, I think in 2022, what we were using at the time, if I was paying for that as a normal business, I would be around $17,000 a month in just subscription services.
Yeah, so, it's crazy how they just add up. But I think to your point, do what you can for free, because then you can spend the money in your budget for things that are a little bit higher ticket that will help drive the needle a little bit more, like that videography or the photography that's going to help tell your story. There's lots of other ways that you can invest too. If you invest maybe in a copywriter who can help if that's not your strong suit, those things that are going to cost a little bit more, you might as well take things back a little bit where you can.
Oh, I call it delegate and elevate. Like, there's no reason for me to do stuff I don't know how to do. Like, I'm going to spend more money at the end of the day fixing it than I am just hiring
more money, more time.
Yeah, like that's, when we start talking about stewarding, the dollars that come in, if I'm wasting my time doing something that I can honestly delegate, for a nominal amount, why not? Like that's what it's supposed to be. I mean, I called you yesterday in a hurry of like, hey, I'm trying to fix this email software before I destroy the website you build. Can you help me out? Like, it's one of those things like I could have just knocked it all apart, or then I would be calling you the next day going, hey, I just ruined everything you built. I need to pay you an emergency fee real quick. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me versus just delegate that out, elevate it, move it forward. And that's been a moniker of mine for years, delegate and elevate. Like
delegate and elevate.
Yep.
I'm gonna adopt that for myself too.
You should.
Because I think it works not just in nonprofit, it's just in life and in business.
Right. It's all the way around, like, home projects, all that stuff. It's just, being comfortable and taking a risk are two different things. Like, you can learn something and take time to do it, but if you just want it done well and done right, delegate it off. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Even with management, like, the hierarchy of things, it works out really well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. I think this is a really helpful conversation for people who are at different stages in their donor experience, kind of things that they can try and maybe come back to you or I and share how things have worked well for them.
Absolutely. I mean, on the show or anything, if you want to share my info, I'm more than happy to walk with people that are learning, or if they know something to do better, I love to hear that too, because, it's, I call it beg, borrow, and steal. So you're always finding stuff. We're not reinventing. We're just trying to help each other move the needle forward. So.
Yeah. And how can people connect with you?
So it's easiest to connect with me via email. It's just jason@katoaproject.org. And hopefully there's a way for people to see that all written out down the road. But yeah, feel free. You can go onto our website at katoaproject.org too. You can find my information, send me a message. And we'd love to chat and see what's going on. You may like what we do and want to learn more, or I may like what you do and want to learn more too. So feel free.
Yeah. And do you have one last piece of advice for our listeners?
Oh man, have fun doing it. I think that's the big thing. If you're not having fun, if you're not having joy in what you're doing, figure out why, and then go figure out what will bring you joy along the way.
Put the fun back in fundraising.
Fun and fundraising. The fundraising is always going to be there. That's the thing. Raising funds is great. But I think telling the story is much better. When you tell the story well, the funds usually follow.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. Wonderful to spend time with you as always.
Always. Thank you.